So Mike and Matt, appreciate your willingness to participate again as we continue our series on the Story Way. We're going to spend today talking a little bit about kind of the principles and the concepts and the underlying philosophies of CP 2.0, where that, what helped us build the system, and what are the principles that we rely on. So I guess one of you kind of just briefly kind of walk down the board and what's trying to happen at each one of the major pieces of the board, starting at the phase pull, and as we go down the board, going all the way around the trailer, getting to the daily kata board for our crews. Matt, why don't you start us off?
So, full right side of the board starts with large chunks of work, month chunks of work. As we try and figure out the overall direction and flow of the project, it gets laid out there, and then it's just a progression from the right side all the way around the trailer of just breaking it into smaller, more manageable tasks, which is a group activity. So we build an outline to get started, and then we just start bringing in all the trades, and we just start breaking it down into smaller and smaller chunks of work. So as that works, we bring it in, we go from the month chunks, we go to week chunks, and then from there we break it down into day chunks for each crew, and then daily our intent is to start breaking it down into hour chunks. Currently, we're in the 3 chunks a day. What we're going to do by break, what we're going to do by lunch, and then finish out the day. So pretty broad overview, but that's the way it works. It's just a group project to take it from a year-long project down to hour-long tasks.
So talk a little bit more about the group conversation.
So contrast, right? Contrast from 1.0 to 2.0 world. 1.0 was we provide the schedule, and 2.0 we just provide an outline of what we think. We get to set the way we're going to flow through the project, but from there it's we bring all the experts in their trades. So whether it's the tinners, the drywallers, who's ever kind of leading that train, we bring those main players together and open discussion. That's the biggest difference between old and new is it's this broad discussion. Everybody's input matters, and then we just kind of orchestrate that. So rather than telling them how we're going to do this, we just help orchestrate the conversation between the parties on, hey, how are we all going to work through this space?
So Mike, as you spent the time developing the framework for the production system, construction production 2.0 here at Story, was that part of the intention?
Well, ironically, I mean, when I was a young engineer, one of the first things I did was I got a book on critical path method scheduling, and I became fascinated with it. I went to a couple computer scheduling classes, and the company where I was working then, we began to run a computerized version of a CPM schedule at a university computer. And so for the first, 10 years of my life, I was an advocate of getting ever more sophisticated, ever better computer schedules. And I've spent the last 30 years of my life trying to keep people from using them. Because it became apparent that the development of a schedule by a schedule jockey had become simply a technical task, and it had to do very straightforward logic, relatively high amounts of guessing as to durations and relationships, and then to top it off, at least in the experiences I had, we would sort the schedule that we sent to the subcontractors with early starts only. So the intent, without knowing, we were trying to get the subs to start as early as possible, where now we know for certain the fastest we can build a project is to have nobody start until as late as possible when they can start and work unimpeded throughout their work. So we were sending all the wrong messages, and on top of that, my experience was that it was a highly unusual superintendent that would actually take a well-detailed a CPM schedule and delve into it enough to understand what the logic network looked like and where the numbers came from. And in addition to that, they were doing 2-week look-ahead schedules that had nothing to do with should, simply was a schedule that was based on could. And the conversations were non-existent, and it became obvious to me that we had to create an environment in which the people that were working on the project were involved in the construction of the project schedule and involved in any manipulations of that or updates of that as the project unfolded, as we learned more and more about the job. So that was sort of the underlying thought that I had. But what really led me to the use of the boards and the Post-it notes was I was an on-site project manager on a General Motors assembly plant, and as they were getting ready to initiate the operations in that plant, they had a room that they had wanted to be delivered to them first, and it was a room that had 3 walls that were whiteboards, and they were putting up Post-it notes all over those boards as to how they were going to bring this plant online. And I asked them why they were doing that, and they said because it's easy to look at and see what we're doing. And I thought, Post-it notes on a time-based calendar is a way that everybody can see where we're at.
So you mentioned there a little bit about should and could. So the Systems 2.0 is based on should, can, will, did. So why don't you spend a little time just explaining what those mean and why they're important?
Well, first, let me give Glenn Ballard the credit for having brought those 4 words up in his doctoral thesis on the last planner. When I heard him explain that to me, we were in the midst of trying to work on the improvement of a project down in Venezuela that had about 12,000 people coming through the turnstiles. And I looked at Glenn and I said, Glenn, I think should, can, will, did seems kind of simple to me when we're trying to work with 12,000 folks here. And he said, I think that's the beauty of it, that if we focus on what we should be doing, and his definition of should was doing something that released work to the downstream operation. That was what defines should. And then could was, as he described it, was the way that manufacturing controls things is rather than a detect and correct, they use a process of assuring that things will happen as planned. And he said, and so the could, the can, we need to screen those operations so that ideally we are not sending any crews out into the field that cannot complete the work we've assigned. And the did, his perception of how to measure that was very different than we're doing here. But I think the beauty of that is it is so fundamentally simple. I mean, I think even Oscar Roach would like the fact that it's just 4 words. Should.
I think you would love that, yes.
And it's easy to explain to somebody that this is should, this is where it comes through the should filter. Now we're working to assure that it can clear the can filter. And when we put it onto the 2-week or the weekly work plan, that's what we will do. And then we can measure whether or not we did it. And I think it is the simplicity of that is one of the things that fascinates people that first get around it.
So Matt, you ran jobs in, I'll say, in a 1.0 style. You've run jobs in the 2.0 style. So Mike has explained a little bit of I'll say the theoretical kind of some differences there. What's the practical reality look like? So as you were running jobs, and they were good jobs. This isn't that they were bad jobs by any means, but talk about what it felt like as a superintendent and what burden or lack thereof you had as that style was used versus as you've run jobs using 2.0.
So I think selfishly, the 1.0 world demanded much more time of the superintendent. It was just everything resided in you. So you couldn't leave the job, you couldn't take vacations, you couldn't do those kinds of things because you disseminated all the information to everyone. Challenges of that were you'd run into a guy on the site and you'd have a conversation about whatever they're running into and how we're going to adapt to that. So now you have to run around and find 7 other contractors and explain to them what we just ran in over there. Well, contractor number 4 threw a problem at that one, so now we had to circle back, and we were just in this never-ending circle of trying to get the communication right. And it's just like playing telephone. Eventually, something changed. You didn't get it through. 2.0, we're all there in the room. And so I've had the opportunity to watch several times where all we did was get the people in the room. So what used to be we had to work through all these things on our own. We get the guys that understand the work best in the room, and they start having the conversation. You started that now you just have to kind of sit back and listen. Make sure they're staying within the guardrails of what the job demands, and they run with it. Sometimes it takes 15, 20 minutes, and for me, I can watch and think back and say, man, that was an all-day or a 2-day problem that we just solved in 15 minutes because everybody that was involved was in the room here to talk about it. So for me, that's the biggest difference, and we've laid out 2 weeks worth of work, so there's always the next 2 weeks. Now, is there going to be minor adjustments to that plan? Yes, but not the major, hey, every week we gotta replan everything like there used to be. So it's easier to leave. It's easier, I think, like we talk about a lot. COVID really shined a light on how powerful the system is, because you get a call and, okay, that superintendent's out for 10 days. The plan's in place. The guys just kept going. Somebody else goes in there. Okay, I'll get caught up. I got a whole week to get caught up before we're even making minor changes. So that just, from that superintendent standpoint, it just really it shared that pressure amongst everybody versus just being solely on the one person.
So we've talked about, I'll say, low tech, high collaboration as a fundamental principle of the system. We've talked about kind of graduating down the board of should, can, will, did. This is based on lean concepts. It's based on things that were drawn from Toyota. So Mike, maybe share what are some of the fundamental kind of concepts that was drawn from Toyota and their production system and some of that. I'll say from a technical tool standpoint that helped inform how the boards were organized, and then kind of how the meeting and discussion routine was laid out.
Well, everything that Toyota does, they will not use technology unless they are convinced that it is to their benefit. Now, obviously, when you're assembling Toyota Tundras every 2 minutes, there has got to be massive amounts of computerized assembly parts and logistics and stuff going on in the background. But at the base of their whole production system, it was that people who were on the line had the ability, the expectation, and the authority to stop the line if there was a problem. And I think that's one of the things that struck me, because I can recall at times thinking that if we have a quality issue, we need to stop the work in a construction setting. And the first thing I would get back was, you don't understand how much pressure we have for production here. We can't stop the work. And I'm thinking, is it anything close to a $40,000 Tundra every 2 minutes? Is it that kind of pressure? Because I know a company that will stop the line if there is something wrong and fix it. That concept of dealing with problems as they come up in a way that you get whoever needs to be there to get that done, is one of those things that goes on in the background at Toyota that I think what Matt was just saying is the way it's happening now in CP 2.0, that we get the people in the room that are either have the problem or can help fix the problem and get that done fairly quickly. I think the thing that I will say that the thing that concerned me when Greg and Glenn and a couple other guys began to really get into the deep end of the pool with Toyota manufacturing was that they were making every attempt to try to take every one of the tools that Toyota had and figure out how to systematically put them into construction and call them something different, or in most cases even calling them like Kaizen, as opposed to methods improvement. And I began to become very nervous that I decided I did not want to be one of the lean lemmings that was headed to the cliff, that I wanted to call it something else. And so we began to phrase it as crew-centered construction, because I was convinced that the focus should be on making sure that every day every crew has what they need to go to work. So I think from my perspective, the things that most impressed me about Toyota were less of their technical Kanban and Kaizen and stuff, but more their culture. Because it began to become apparent to me as we started thinking about this stuff that a CP 2.0 will not work in a CP 1.0 culture. And so the concepts that Shingo and Engineer Ono had brought to the Toyota family had brought to the table early on, before they even got into car manufacturing, those tools were developed out of the culture. And I saw it happen time and time again, where we would try to adopt a Japanese tool into an American culture, and the thing would die a death of 1,000 wounds because we weren't willing to create the culture that it took to support that particular tool. And as we've learned, and I don't know how deep you want to go into that, but we clearly found here that where the culture was the best, the tools worked the best. And so I think for me, it was more of an impact that Toyota's story had a bigger impact on me on the culture side of their approach than it did the technical side.
So, the evolution here was interesting. We certainly, the first job we rolled it out on was the web filings project, and we picked some people very specifically, who were going to be inclusive and including, and it was going to be a safe place, and that was always and it continues to be a very important element about our trailers are safe. Things are not going to go the way we want all the time. How do we understand it? How do we overcome that and then move forward? But I'll say in the early years, the first 3 or 4 years, we were almost singularly focused on here are the tools, here's how to do it. We were teaching people new processes. And Randy Lundstrom came to a Friday morning meeting and said, hey, these 3 or 4 jobs just feel different. And so, okay, and they were having more success. We found that they were using the system the most closely to the way it was prescribed to be used. So, okay, that's one element, but we needed to describe what that meant, because we just say, well, just make it feel different for everybody, and that's unfair to everybody else because they don't even know what we're talking about. So that kicked off talking about respect, trust, collaboration, teamwork. That was the culture we were ultimately trying to create, and we then talked about or understood what it meant for the participants on the site. How did they need to behave to do that? But I'll say at the same time, and Mike mentioned Shingo a little bit, but about the same time as we were discovering that, Mike encouraged me kind of against my will, I'll say, but okay, I trust you. We went to a seminar or a conference called Casten, and then about a year later went to a couple of Shingo get-togethers. And maybe Mike, just talk about what those are and kind of what do you think that helped bring to us. And then Matt, I'll ask you. So now you've lived through that. What is that kind of meant to the organization?
Well, I think that as I was saying, the two of the things that came out of the Toyota experience, as people began to really delve into Toyota, the two of the things that came out that really jumped out at me was, number one, there was a guy there in Japan by the name of Shigeo Shingo who went to work with Engineer Ono as a consultant, and Shingo was obviously a wicked smart individual, and he came up with a group of principles that were essentially the bedrock of how they defined their culture. Things like lead with humility and respect every individual and grow trust, and but also things like seek perfection and think scientifically. And those particularly the seeking perfection and thinking scientifically are things that almost always run counter to a CP 1.0 and we don't have time. I remember every time we would do an analysis of an operation and project what the potential of it was, and invariably I would get the response from particularly the more senior people was, now remember, this is construction, as if somehow we weren't capable of seeking perfection. And it is seeking perfection that essentially gives you license to do about anything else that is going on in the project, if you are essentially dedicated to that. The other thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, most people would go to Toyota and then come back with an action item list of all of the tools that they wanted to install. And Mike Rother at the University of Michigan who was working with Jeff Leiker, who had written lots of books on Toyota, began to realize that was not working back in a manufacturing facility in the United States. And he spent 10 years doing research at Toyota to find out what was the underbelly or the undertow or the undercurrents that were causing them to be able to consistently improve, and came across what apparently McGraw-Hill had him call Toyota Kata, which is an improvement routine that has become so embedded in their culture that they didn't even talk about it because they didn't even think that it was. It's sort of like asking a fish what's water, you know, and so the combination of the cultural definitions that Shingo brought to Toyota and the background continuous improvement every day, every person in the organization striving to continuously improve that Rother brought to the surface, I think both of those had a huge impact on how this has been allowed to evolve.
So that's the what. Matt, talk about, so how have both of those and other things too, has that influenced how you ran projects? How has that influenced how you've seen others do it, and as you've coached folks through it? I mean, what are some of the, I guess, the real world implications of that thinking or those philosophies?
So, preface it with the fact that it's all these tools that are provided are just that, just tools. In getting those behaviors to change, to learn to use those tools and those systems, is an everyday process. It doesn't just change overnight. The culture doesn't change overnight. The habits don't change overnight. When things are going well and we can implement the systems and we can use the right behaviors, the jobs feel better. Like Randy came back and said, things just feel better. The mood is better. Everything's good. Where I still think there's plenty of room for improvement, but as the job gets stressed or the people get stressed, we're still, and I know that we've been doing this 11 years, I've been doing it 8, but there's still the habit to go back to what we did the previous 80 years. And so getting over that, because when we need to act and behave in the correct way and use the systems is in those points, that's when we would get the even more benefit out of them, and we still revert back to what we know, because that's what it is. So, but it's something that you have to, as command and control style for the first 20 years, I likened it to a 12-step program. We have to think about it every day. Like every day we have to say, yep, okay, this is the way I need to do this. It feels better when I do this. Everything's good. But so it doesn't just happen overnight. It's that incremental change, and it's those patterns. We practice the patterns enough that they become natural. We rolled out the JR programs 3 years ago, and so at 3 years, it's at a point where you just roll through that without thinking about it, without having to reference the card every single time. You just know that these things are going to go. It's the same with all the systems through that trailer. You just it's practice, and we just get a little more comfortable with it every day.
Kind of building habits. So I think you talked about 4 or 5 things there. Building habits is an incremental process. For me, being part of this the entire time, patience has never necessarily been one of my virtues, but it's been important that we have patience. And I think one of the principles we're just trying to get a little bit better every day. And you do that every day, and over not too many days, you've usually made a pretty significant amount of improvement. Both of you have talked about being inquisitive, about being curious. I think that's an element of experimentation where we're not necessarily required to do it the way it's always been done, but there's license to, in the case if you're trying to create perfection. We have always been imperfect, not that we haven't tried hard or worked hard, but we're going to need to try something different in an intentional way to be able to achieve that. And it's going to take a while to get there. It's going to take generations. And so, so I guess for either one of you, what's required of people to be able to do that, and then what does it unleash when we do? What's the when you cross that threshold? What doors that open, or what kinds of opportunities does that create for folks?
Well, one of the things that I learned way back when we were working on just improving operations and trying to do something with projects without having a production system was it sort of dawned on me that there is a hierarchy or a sequence of changing. The easiest thing we found to change was condition, either the physical condition or the environmental condition or whatever. And I'll never forget the look on your face when I gave you the diagram of what the CP 2.0 trailer would look like, and then told you that the other thing we need to change is the condition of our meetings, and we need to have meeting requirements. Now, the intent of the CP 2.0 trailer was not that we couldn't do it some other way, but the thing I was hoping was that the first time somebody walked into that trailer, they would think to themselves, this is something I've never seen on a construction project before. This is different. And I'm convinced that condition of that trailer leads to an awful lot of the conversations and things by just having the conditions changed. Because I know we've all sat through meetings back in the old days where there were 8 people with 4 chairs in an office that was both a tool storage area, a working desk, and an eating facility with old 8-week-old food in the trash can, and half an inch of dirt all over the floor, and wondering why we weren't having a good meeting. And so the changing the condition of the planning facility and changing the condition of how we ran meetings, by just changing those conditions, that eventually changed process, which ultimately will change behavior. Is that fair, Matt?
That's fair.
So what does that then look and feel like, and how does that affect you? How does that affect the people that you're supporting? All of that.
Right. So from that, and it's probably easier just from a superintendent's viewpoint. One, it's you have a dedicated space, right? So we're just going to go in there. It's not disruptive to anybody else. You don't have people coming in and out of the trailer. That's the way it always was. You had these job trailers with a conference room in the middle and offices on either end, and you're trying to have a meeting, and there's people coming in and out of both ends, and so yep, you can focus on it. One of the things we say all the time is being respectful of people's time. While we have more meetings now than we would have ever had before, I'm here to tell you that the duration of those, the overall duration of those meetings, we spend less time in meeting now than we did getting the same information spread out before. It just took twice as long to get all the information shared as it does with the 2.0 trailer that we have. So the other thing that I think it offers us, and the system, not necessarily the trailer itself, but so superintendents have always been celebrated for putting out fires. So rewarded almost. Well, if you look, you probably created the dang fire, and then you got rewarded for putting it out. And so that's a hard thing to overcome. And I spend a lot of time trying to point out small wins, things that would have became a fire that in that meeting were just taken care of and were never a fire, that nobody even realizes was going to be a fire because it was just taken care of. So for me, so you're not spending so much time firefighting. You actually have more time to look out ahead. You get to selfishly spend the time on the things that you want to look at. So everybody has a list of things they want to understand more about the job as the job goes forward. There's just things that, hey, I know this is coming up, I need to look at it. When you're in firefighting mode all the time, that gets closer and closer to the work face, and then all of a sudden it's oh, man, I need to figure this out because we're going to be doing it. Now you just have this time. You can take the time, you can figure those things out in a nice controlled manner when we have time to make changes if we see something we didn't like or we want to ask those questions. So and you use it all the time, tell guys to be selfish, and that's what it is. If you operate the way that it's outlined, you will have more time to do the things that you want to do versus the things that are required of you to do.
So and maybe Mike, you can take credit for it. Maybe it was part of the original construction, but the thing we realized fairly early on, and then that the system was a way for us to, and the trailer and the routines we have, were a system, was a way to plan and schedule the work we had to do. But it was also a developmental tool for the people who were on our sites, from our craftspeople to our foremen to our engineers to our superintendents. It was a developmental tool because in each step, you become the participant in that step before you become the leader in that step, and that starts at the daily routine, where the foreman's the leader and the craftsperson is the participant. That leader of that group becomes the participant at the end of shift and the populating meetings, where the superintendent might be leading that. And so each step of the way, we can grow people in the work as we're growing, as we're completing the work. And so Mike, my curiosity, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, was that done with intention with your design, or was that just not so much, but that's just another benefit of how it actually happens? And
well, ironically, the focus on that actually came from what I thought was a different attraction. When I was a young engineer and beginning to sort of work my way up through an organization, which in hindsight was then and still is an incredible organization. But the thing that I found as I would go from project to project, because I was working during the school year, I was working part-time while I was going to school, and then in the summers I would go out onto a project. And it frustrated me to no end to know that it was going to take me 6 weeks to figure out how this particular project team managed construction. And every project was different. Every project had a different way of doing short-term production scheduling. Every engineer that went from one project to another had to forget what he learned over there and try to figure out what he had to do here. And it struck me that one of the biggest wastes of our time was people trying to figure out how to do the dance at this particular project as opposed to the dance we were doing over there. And it struck me that if we have an enterprise-wide system where the planning environment and the agendas for the meetings and the methodology with which we track production is the same, a young engineer can come from a project that he's leaving and 2 days later be able to run the daily end of shift meeting because he knows what he's doing. And so that was what motivated me. It wasn't anything any more sophisticated than that. It just struck me that, and one of the things that I would say relative to CP 1.0, lean CP 1.0, is the same things happening now with those companies. You go from one project to another, and I promise you that one superintendent will have decided to use these two tools, but not the others. The other one will have decided to use these two tools, but not the others. And so it is just now a bigger toolbox full of stuff that you can pick from as to how you're going to run your project. And I got to believe that we can grow people faster where they are doing the same thing regardless of what project they're on, because of the fact that they learn the routines and they can rely on the routines to help them get through the issues that they haven't yet learned.
So Matt, as you think about your experiences, as you think about all the folks you've interacted with, are there some examples of growing people quicker than maybe you've seen, and are there stories that you have related to that?
So absolutely right. It allows us to. So there's so many facets of being the leader of a site, and so by allowing them to take components and get the public speaking part out of it, so they get up in front of the room and they facilitate. They're facilitating, allowing everybody else to do their part. So that gets that little chunk out of the work, and then they're there and they get to hear the conversations where 1.0 world, these conversations happen one-on-one somewhere, and they don't get to learn how those conversations are facilitated. And then it just allows them to step up. That next step is quicker because it's right there, and I think they're smaller steps within our system that we can move them up to, versus making that big step from going from just a foreman that's never been in a meeting to next job you're the superintendent. And so much more functional when they get to that spot. There's a lot of things that are out of their way. The lean thing, and just a quick story because you brought it up, but as we rolled out our first CP 2.0 up in Sioux City, the mechanical contractor that was there had just come off a lean job with another contractor, and so they walked in and saw our boards, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we've seen this," and we promised them, "No, you've seen something similar, but you've never seen anything like this. We promise." And they're yep, right. And by the end of that job, and so I guess laid out, they say, the lean that they had done was a pull plan, and it was a one and done. They went in, they did the pull plan, they got it laid out. That was it. Never referenced again, never used again, no updates, no nothing. They went out and they figured out the work in the field and did the work. So we had that original meeting offsite in the trailer that was going to be there. Well, the first one we did in the conference room, then the second one in the trailer. Then we got it moved there. By the time we were done, we got done ahead of what we thought. Complicated project with a very tight window. Got done ahead, and they were just like, "Yep, this is nothing like we've ever seen. This actually works." The communication of where we are, where we need to be, from what their original plan was when we sat down the first time to when we actually sat down when the trailer made it to the job, and the day before we started work, we shaved about 25% out of the duration of the job because all the people were in the room, and they were like, "Oh, well, this is only really going to take me a half a day." So the next crew could jump right in behind them in the next half and just get through it. So we as an organization will still have to fight that battle because they've seen lean. They have the impression that, just another lean job. But once we get them through it, it helps.
So I think, circling way back to one of the early discussions about the interesting thing about, or the neat thing about the system, it's all in front of us and we can see it. And then the conversations, we're all in there to hear it. I think there's a story from that same project where I'll say that school was going to be done and we were going to start work in a specific area of the school. And I'll let you tell the story because I think it's a powerful example of, hey, we can see it in front of us and we talk about it and light bulbs go on and good things can happen.
And also that's probably one of the newest portions of the system. It's a piece that's been added in most recently, and that's the illustration of the work that we're going to do. So the crew workflow plan area in the middle of the board's what we would call the bridge from the schedule to the daily work. And so we had that up, and this was on the Thursday School was out on Friday. We were starting work Monday. And school's all in there sitting at the table just like this, looking at the board, and we're talking through the work, and we're showing them where we're going to work, and the light bulb went off. And we've talked through this work with them at nauseum. And they're looking at the picture, and they're like, well, our staff's still going to be here. The superintendent, the secretary, and so it just started that conversation. They finally saw it in the picture that, like, this is going to be a problem. Able to use our crew workflow plans to see where they could relocate to that it wouldn't be disruptive. So we could just relocate once and then bring them back, because they have staff through the summer. The superintendent doesn't get the summer off, and his staff. They worked through the whole thing. They walked out of that room and small wins. Like, nobody really picks up on it. Oh, okay. And I'm just like, does anybody realize what Monday morning would have been like when we started at 6:30 and demoed their rooms, and they got here at 8 and their stuff was gone? Like, so it just, another part of the system that we haven't talked much about is the graphic illustration that we do that shows how we're going to move through the work and where we're going to be. We can say the words all we want. When you see it in a picture and the guy circles the area that we're going to work, and this happens in other things too, that's just a great example, but we'll be talking about the work, and all of a sudden you've circled the area 3 times, and it's like, we've got 3 contractors working in this small area. How's this going to work? It may work just fine. We might just need to, this is how we're phasing through, or maybe, that we didn't quite catch that. So that graphic illustration has saved us a lot of heartache through the time, and it just lets guys know where they're going and where they're going to be, what to expect. Lets us who are visiting sites look in a quick reference just to see, well, we know where the guys are working, and you can go and you can see, and yep, this is what it's supposed to be like, or nope, what's happening.
You know, I want to share one story that I think, it's one of those things that, as I think about it, it is so fundamental that I fail to bring it up often. Greg Howell and Glenn Ballard and I were having dinner in Caracas down in Venezuela, and we had just finished a 2-year engagement on a huge refinery. And we sat there and we were sort of talking about what we'd learned and what we wanted to do, and Greg began to sort of say, I think one of the things that's unique here is we all have different motivations. He said Glenn, who was a philosophy major, just wants to make construction logical. And then he said, and I want to develop theory so that there's theory, a sound theory that we're doing what we're doing as a result of the theory. And he looked at me and he said, you just want to make it fun. And quite frankly, as I got out of project management, one of the things I noticed when I wandered through this General Motors assembly plant was nobody was having fun out there. There was no laughter. There was no fun. There were people coming close to fisticuffs out there over space or whatever. And I thought to myself, had I experienced that when I was a carpenter apprentice, I never would have gone into construction. And I thought, we have got to make this industry to where the people that are doing the work are having fun. And the best way I know how to do that is to make sure they can get done what they want to get done for the day, because that's the way a craftsman has their best day. And that really was the motivation for the whole thing for me. I wasn't concerned about companies making more money or making schedules or whatever. It was create an environment where construction is fun. And I hope that that's begun to filter down into our ranks, where people, particularly youngsters coming aboard, are enjoying it to the point that it hooks them.
Yeah, so as we all know, our motto is we want every craftsperson to have a good day every day, and Once we get to that, we'll get to great days and awesome days and then perfect days. The interesting thing is we've now been doing this for 11 years, and an awful lot of our organization, or anybody new to the industry who's come to us in this last 11 years, doesn't appreciate that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily focus on things in this manner. It's not that they want people to have bad days by any means, but it's a genuine desire from us that what is it that we need to do and how do we need to do things so that the crafts person can have a good day. And because all of the other things come with it: quality, safety, schedule, profitability, career development, all of those things come with it, and that's fantastic. But first and foremost, it starts with when they have a bad day, we can lose all of that, and we usually have in some form or fashion. And so we haven't talked about this, but for a long time, even while doing 2.0, our safety had been frustrating to us. We just had a higher number of incidents than we should, and thankfully they weren't particularly serious most all of the time. And we did a bit of a study that one of the common factors to all of this incidents we had was that people were leaving the trailer not exactly knowing what they were going to do for the day, or something changed during the course of the day from the plan they had. And so we simply changed something really small. And in subsequent discussions, we'll talk about work standards and routines and changing tiny things that have big impact. Oscar Roach had shared some of that with us. And the question was simply, Matt, what's your assignment for today? Mike, what's your assignment for today? And have our folks repeat that back to us. And it's been about 2 years now since we have started asking that question. We've had one accident, and that accident actually had an element of change to it. The crew wasn't expecting a delivery of a bunch of materials. It was bitterly cold outside, and they working inside and ended up with some cold-related kinds of things because it had changed the work we were doing for the day. So again, it may be a tedious question, but it's a question that's designed for those guys to have a good day. One, do they know what they're going to do? They can go do that. Two, they're going to be safe and be in the same piece. All in one piece when they go home. And so, I think it sounds a little corny about it's everybody have a good day every day, but it's a genuine belief, it's a genuine desire, and I think it's been a huge element of what we tried to do. And quite frankly, as we had to sell the system to people, to get them to at least try it early on, because Mike and I were selling hope. We were selling a theory, and we believe this will work. Who was going to argue with everybody wanting to have a good day? And so people would say, okay, I'll try it. And to their credit, they did the hard work, and the system allowed things to go good for them, for more people to have good days each day.